It's about solving problems, stupid, not just about intelligence. What I mean with that is that when we look at the current war for talent in the AI space, there's two concerning vectors that we follow that tell us that something is a little bit broken in the AI business model. One is a lot of companies are delivering impressive revenue growth, user growth, but they're losing money, and they're not just losing money as a business, but they're often also losing money on a unit cost basis. In other words, every sale they make costs them more money. So this is akin to the early days in the internet when people were giving away dollars for clicks or something like that, or also similar to companies that still exist today like Uber, even Airbnb to some extent, that at least in the early days have been losing money hands over fist, even while they were making sales, just in order to gain traction and also to generate sales to attract investors and all of this. So again, back to the AI space, we have probably the best example is Windsurf. I'm going to talk about this in a second, but the companies, I would say even OpenAI is in that realm that are delivering good growth, but they're not making any money, and most importantly, they're not making money on a user basis, and the other meaning on a unit economic basis. So every sale loses money, kind of thing. Now, on the other hand, we also have a war for talent, which in principle is not a bad thing. I don't have a problem with people getting paid if they're worth it. It looks to me, though, that a lot of these people, a lot of these so-called AI, particularly AI researchers, which is an oxymoron in itself, on the Elon Musk side here, that there's no such thing as a researcher or scientist. There's only engineers. And that brings us to the point, like, unless you can solve real problems for people, and people are ready to pay for that, and if you can solve a real problem, people will be paying for that, you're not really doing anything useful. And I understand there's research and science and all of this, but paying tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars for people who just do some sort of research, that's just ridiculous. So these two things, so companies not making money on a per sale basis, employees being overpaid, these two indicators definitely tell us that something is wrong with the AI ecosystem. Now, the way we see this is, it's not surprising to us. Like we see some of the malfunctions of the system, for example, also high-frequency traders on Wall Street, which are already doing useless work, are now being paid to go and train, Anthropic's models to do the same useless thing, which is high-frequency trading, basically glorified scalping on Wall Street. It's the proverbial, paperclip economy. It's just not paperclips. It's getting a certain type of intelligence to do things that happen to make money in the case of high frequency trading, and happen to not make any money in the case of a lot of the let's say coding platforms and stuff. Now, how do we see this? What are our views, and how should we position ourselves in a context like that? The prediction would be that we are reaching bubble situation here, when people are getting overpaid like this, and companies are getting valuations that they don't deserve. So that's definitely a conclusion. Now, does that mean we should sell everything? Definitely not, because like in many of these technology waves, the actual value add is here. So these technologies are incredibly value added because they are actually helping us gather, collect, represent, summarize knowledge, which is useful, and they're also having a massive second order effect, which is Gen AI, which will excuse me, I'm just next to a restaurant here. So again, the second order effect, Gen AI, which will hopefully allow us to deliver the kinds of videos that we need to train robots and actually transition into the real world, where real robots can do things like self-driving, and hopefully later on humanoid robots can do a lot more useful work, particularly dangerous work. And then we have the other really useful thing, which is we've been speaking about this in the last couple of episodes, the era of experience, introduced by Richard Sutton and David Silver, where we can have real breakthroughs in science. So we're definitely extremely hopeful and bullish on the technological implications and the wealth generation capacity of the current form of artificial intelligence. But we also see the pains and the typical, bubbly type behaviors of players that are in for the wrong reasons, such as we see right now with, let's say, Windsurf and Meta and all these, OpenAI, in my opinion, also to some extent, at least this version of OpenAI. This is not even on podcast. It's August 11, 2025. This is Krim Delco for the day. The fund is up 2%. The market's down 40 basis points. For the year, we are down 7%. The market is up 8.5%. We're underperforming by 15.5%. So this is a conversation about the current state of the financial markets when it comes to artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence in the mid-2020s is all driven by transformer-based models that are capable of solving language and solving certain multimodal problems, such as translating text into video, video into text, video into action, action into music. All these kinds of things can be done now with the kinds of technologies that we have. The engineering, the hardware, the software have brought us to this point. It has driven us to a really interesting crossroads, I think, where we are now at the point where, as consumers, we are expecting these models to get better and better. So we want them. We are happy with them. But the businesses that are providing them are not able to make money. And this is the first thing we want to talk about. Now, is this a bubble or not? I think we want to put this aside for a second. Let's just explain what's actually going on. And let's use Windsurf as an example. Windsurf is a company that is offering front-end software development tools that are basically very low code, if no code driven. So you can basically talk to a user interface and it writes code for you, so you can think about something and then it just writes code for you. Something along those lines. Now, Windsurf as a company has been first offered to be bought by OpenAI. Then they walked away. Then Google offered to pay for certain employees and ended up not buying the company. And this whole charade, if you will, or this whole bonanza around Windsurf, I think it's a good example of what is actually going on in the real world right now, which is that we have definitely a value add in terms of people able to deliver technologies that are useful. So on that front, I think we can put a checkpoint. In what Windsurf is doing, let me put it into order. Try to explain what others are doing, how they compete with, let's say, Anthropic, how they compete with OpenAI and Gemini, why there is this big bonanza around this company. And I think it's a good example of what is actually going on with the whole space. So Windsurf is a company, again, that offers a front-end software development platform. So it's think about it this way. Imagine you're looking at a software editor, and in the old times, this would be. I'm not a big coder, but I worked with editors, and it's literally almost like a Word document. It's just for software. So you write stuff. It does the indentation for you. It does spell checking. It does. In particular, if you write in Python, it understands the indentation, which is very important in Python. And if you write in C++, it understands the curly brackets and all of this. So it does a lot of work for you. Now, what these code editors are doing, these sort of advanced code editors like Windsurf, they are much more intelligent. They can help you basically write code just by you thinking about stuff. They do a really good job in making sure it's also tested, unit tested, things like that. So they make it production ready, as people say in the industry. Now you might ask yourself, okay, fine, that's great. So where's the value here? I mean, or actually, you might even ask, where's the problem here? I mean, this seems like a very useful tool, right? You want to write software, you take Windsurf and you go ahead, you do vibe coding, things like that. The problem is that first, there's a couple of companies that do the same thing. And like in many cases, it's very difficult to differentiate between, let's say, a Cursor and a Windsurf and a Replit, And then there's also the upstream competitors like Anthropic, OpenAI, and Gemini, who offer similar services, so similar front-end code development platforms, but also they are actually the foundation guys, as it says in the industry. So they are also training the foundation models that are necessary to offer this. In other words, they train the large language models which enable a fine-tuning and an actual delivery of a service like this. And lo and behold, companies like Windsurf actually they have their own foundation model, which was trained for coding, but then they also use other people's foundation models. So that's roughly the lay of the land as we know it right now. So what happened is that OpenAI was supposed to buy Windsurf, and then they walked away. Google is taking some of their employees, but the company itself, even though they have probably around $100 million in annual recurring revenue, seems to be worth barely maybe 2 times sales or something like that, 1 time sales, like really, really low value. And the question, of course, is why is that? How can this be? Shouldn't this company be worth billions? Well, the problem is that the company has revenue, but is losing more money than they're actually getting in revenue. In other words, their sales are not even covering the cost of goods. And that's a problem that we see in other companies as well. It's not very clear with OpenAI because we assume that it's very similar there. We've heard through the grapevine companies like Perplexity are suffering for the same reason. That's why there's been rumors that Apple should buy Perplexity. Grok, in my opinion, is very similar, although Musk is very instrumental about driving revenue. His modus operandi in all these companies has always been to find beachheads that can generate revenue and bootstrap yourself. He does not want to depend on investors. He does not want to depend on capital markets. So, but again, the problem is that everybody is it's a race to the bottom when it comes to pricing. It's a race to the bottom when it comes to margins, because everything is about user growth. Everything is about training bigger clusters, offering more and more features and not being able to charge for them. So this is roughly the landscape that we live in. And I think as a corollary to that, there's also the war for talent. Well, if you don't really make money with your products, then it doesn't really matter how much you pay your people. And that's what's happening also. And I would say, as an observer of the industry, also on the academic front, I would say, quite a foot in the door on the academic side of things. And I can see that, these are smart kids, but they're certainly not worth the kind of money that they're expecting to make right now, simply because it reminds me a bit of my trading days when I was on Wall Street. There's the occasional startup who actually makes money, but a lot of people, let's say Victor Niederhofer or Stanley Druckenmiller, they have good names, but they ended up losing more money than they actually made. Now, they enriched themselves, good for them, but they weren't able to really add value. Maybe Soros is one of the few who actually soup to nuts added value to the system by profitably trading. This AI space, it feels very similar. So where does this lead us? Does this mean we are in a bubble? Again, we already said in the prelude, no, of course not. I mean, there is definitely a massive wealth creation. Why is there wealth creation? Why is this even useful? Well, if you think about it, what are large language models doing? They're compressing the knowledge of human beings. They're compressing what human knowledge has come up with so far and has been able to put down in writing, whether it's in mathematical forms, whether it's in textual forms, and increasingly also in video and acoustic forms. All of this knowledge that we have is being compressed and represented in latent space and made retrievable through Gen AI. So that's definitely a very valuable thing. And whether we develop a business model or not, that's not even the big question, I think, for us investors, at least on the macro side. On the micro side, of course, it is a big question because we want to know where to invest in. And that's, we at Launch Capital Partners have very early on decided to go with real world AI. And I think as we look at the space right now, it starts crystallizing more and more that is the right way to go, because it also clears us from all this froth and hot air and bubble stuff. What do we mean by real world AI? Well, the Tesla full self driving
and the Tesla Robotaxi, which has been launched in Austin, is the first real-world AI at scale that has at least a chance to be a profitable company applying AI to the real world. Why do we believe that? Well, because the technology is working. We have it in our own cars. We have enough evidence that the robotaxi is working. It's real world, and it's an incredibly useful tool. It saves a lot of time. It saves money. It saves accidents. It's going to lower the cost of transportation, and that is very, very useful. Now, there's always the P times Q formula that we use, the P-Thiel concept, which is, okay, you can add a lot of value to society, but can you also capture it? And that's part of the problem with a lot of these AI companies, whether it's OpenAI or Windsurf. They're not able to capture the kind of value that their technologies are creating. So this brings us to the really fundamental question, okay, how does a company that is part of a wave that is creating value for society, how does a company actually capture value? And we've seen this many times before. The airline industry, arguably as a whole, is certainly adding value to society. You can fly around the world, but airlines don't make money. However, engine makers do make a lot of money. Even aircraft manufacturers make money. So certain parts of the value chain make money, others don't. And I think it comes down to the fundamental question, and that's the beginning of this episode. It's about solving the problem. It's not about intelligence. Nobody cares about code. Nobody cares about a particular line of code that has been written on the Windsurf platform or the Anthropic platform or whatever platform. What people care about is they need to solve problems. That's why they need apps for. That's why they need software for. And I think Tesla is a beautiful example where you have a car that drives itself. My problem is not how they wrote the software, whether they used a cursor or something. I just need to go from A to B. And if you can do this at, let's say, 60 cents per mile versus $3 per mile, then that's a real problem that you solve for me. So companies that can do this, they generate wealth. And companies that can't do this, they don't generate wealth. They might enrich themselves, particularly, high frequency trading is a perfect example. There's zero value added whatsoever. The whole industrial complex, the whole algo trading industrial complex on Wall Street adds no value to society, but it enriches people, and that's unfortunate. But it's a very dangerous place to invest in. As an investor, you want to be somewhere where there's a cost structure in place that can drive down the cost and drive up the value at the same time. That's where value is created, and that's how you make money as an investor. And if we take Tesla, is a good example because, again, it's not about the software. It's not about the cameras. It's not about the fancy algorithms that help us solve the glare in the camera when we drive into the sun. We just want to go from A to B. By the way, it's not very different with, let's say, OpenAI's ChatGPT when we are interested in, let's say, writing an essay. What we really want to do is either sell that essay to a company, let's say a publishing company. We might want to write the essay for ourselves and put it on Substack, and we might want to either garner some prominence, or we want to sell ads against it, or we want to use the essay to get a job. The actual purpose of the essay is not to write the essay. I think most people don't write for the sake of writing. Maybe some do. And there's certainly enjoyment in it, but there has to be a purpose beyond that and some sort of goal. Let's say I write a lot. Actually, this podcast series, the purpose of this podcast series is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. I do it for my own educational purposes, to keep record, but also to engage with the community. That's my goal. So the technologies that I use, if you can give me a technology that can help me engage with my community at lower cost and higher efficacy, I'm going to use it and pay for it. So there's always an underlying problem. I think we humans are driven by certain underlying problems, and we can go, this can turn into philosophy very quickly, right? Well, what's the ultimate purpose? Reproduction, I don't know, you want to be on your deathbed and look back and say this was a great journey, or I had purpose in life. I don't know what that is. I don't want to talk about this right now. But I'm saying is we have goals, we have solutions to problems that are helping us reach those goals. And the technologies that can enable us to do this, they are actually the wealth-creating technologies. Now, driving from A to B with a robo-taxi certainly is not a philosophical problem. It's a very mundane, fundamental problem, but it's a real problem, and it's expensive. It's not the most expensive thing people spend money on, but transportation is pretty much up there. There's other problems like healthcare and housing and education that are more pressing, and I wish we worked a lot more to solve those. But at least transportation is part of a sort of package of problems that are still relatively expensive, particularly when you live in areas, let's say urban areas, and they're also they can be tackled. They can also help us, with sustainable energy. So transportation is a good problem to solve, and Tesla is in the business of solving that. I think what's really exciting about the area of experience, which is sort of this new model, this, let's say, next level of the bitter lesson, where we think that if we can have self-learning AI and we can apply compute to self-learning AI, we can actually start solving real problems in physics and science, get better batteries, better heat shields for Starship, faster communication networks, cheaper communication networks, maybe at some point, cheaper building materials, faster buildings, so we can build faster, get more supply, lower housing costs. So there's this, we can also solve problems like environmental problems, erosion problems on the coast, maybe redivert rivers in a way that they don't create floods all the time. So we can learn a lot by using AI. My point is that you want to be invested in companies that solve problems and not solve certain features, like, for example, writing code or writing nice essays or generating nice graphics or generating nice videos. That in itself is not, but we're not interested in nice videos. What we're interested in is story. It's a good example, right? You're not really interested in videos. Nobody wants to watch a sequence of pixels. But what you really want is narratives. Humans love narratives, whether it's comedy, tragedy, drama, it doesn't matter. But you want narratives. You want to be entertained, or in the case of robotics, they want to use generative video for actually training. But again, that's a narrative, if you will. It's a text video action model that goes from, hey, can you generate me a certain scenario so my robot can learn how to behave in the real world, which is then solve a problem like my robot can learn how to cook, my robot can learn how to clean. So to summarize, it's the solution, stupid. It's what we're looking for, not the intelligence. So if you have a coding platform per se, that's not going to move the needle. Others can do that. But if you build a fully integrated supply chain, let's say like Tesla, which is not just the AI, but all the way down to producing the robots at scale, maybe even the mining for the ingredients that go into the robots, particularly the batteries and the electric motors. If you have that value chain, control that value chain, lower the cost, iterate around that value chain, that's where the wealth creation is. And I think that's very, very important. So to summarize again, we are very, very excited about these technological innovations. Technological innovations always have very, very lasting impacts on society. In the short run, they're overestimated. In the long run, they're underestimated. And the wealth creation happens with companies that can deliver solutions at lower cost that generate higher value for the users. Thank you.